My play of the day from round 5 of the Sinquefield Cup is the game between Levon Aronian and Gata Kamsky. Neither player showing their best form in the tournament so far. Let's see what happened today. And a Dutch defence from Kamsky. Often he plays very solidly with the Slav, but today obviously wants a fight. And Aronian repeated the line that he played against Carlsen earlier in the tournament. It's exactly the same as I think it was their round 2 encounter. And here, if you remember, Aronian had played Castle's kingside, but Carlsen quickly got the initiative with knight e4, and after e5 was already doing pretty well. Let's go back. So Aronian improved on this. Instead of castling, he played bishop g3. Well, this is very subtle indeed. The basic idea is that white wants to play d5 without allowing e5. So, for example, in this position, if white plays d5, then e5 is a good counter. So after bishop g3, basically white is preparing d5 without allowing e5. h6 by Kamsky. I'm not sure about that move. I'm not sure. Now, I know he's preparing something aggressive with g5, but for a moment g6 is rather weak. I don't know, it kind of further weakens black's king position. I think in general the Dutch is a very controversial opening, because after you play f5 it weakens this diagonal. Now if you manage to get some storming attack going like this and manage to get in f4, well, you'll forget about your weak king position. But very often black can suffer because this pawn isn't back on f7, and g6 is, now it's even weaker, so black has to take great care in this position. Okay, Kamsky grabbed the bishop on g3. I mean, I guess this is the idea of h6, so that after bishop h4 you can play g5 and hunt down that bishop. Aronian continued with his strategy to play d5. So Kamsky grabs the bishop. And this is a very double-edged position. Obviously this is a wonderful piece, and this to some extent protects black's king, and has a great diagonal here. But white has this wonderful clump of pawns on the king side that protects his king, and you can often use those in a really dynamic way. I was wondering whether white could take here and push forward and maybe go for g4 here and use that kind of extra pawn on the king side. That's possible. But Aronian played rook c1. So, well, he does prevent this idea of giving up this bishop to damage white's pawns. That's one thing. And the rook is useful on c1 anyway. Kamsky took and then broke with e5. I think you need to play e5 here, otherwise white will try and get in on those light squares with g4. And of course this has to be taken. Now, bishop takes would allow bishop takes b7. That's not too good. So c6 first. And now Aronian tries to weaken those light squares. If bishop takes pawn, then this is already rather good fun for white, actually, with pressure here. It's very easy to put pressure on c6 and then play the rook to d1. So Kamsky forced the bishop away from the diagonal before he took on e6. But of course, it's very double-edged advancing this g-pawn, because the king is weaker. Also, the f4 square is weakened. So there's a kind of dynamic balance here. Black has the two bishops. White has a healthier king position. I like these pawns in front of the king. And there's a chance to perhaps put some pressure on black's queen side. But there's a kind of dynamic balance. But at the moment, I would prefer to play white, because I nearly always prefer it if I have a better king position than my opponent. And it's clear that white has some pressure here. And now a nice regrouping from Aronian, bishop d3, just preparing to bring the knight round here. But black is not without chances, as we're about to see. Aronian brought the queen all the way back to d1 here. I was a bit surprised about that. I'd expected the queen to go to c2 and then, simply rook d1 or, knight f4 and so on. It's also possible to keep the queen active to play queen a3 as well, just to remind black that this pawn could be vulnerable sometimes. But yeah, so I was a bit surprised by queen d1. And now Kamsky shows that he's not without chances on the king side. He can actually break open the h-file, as we're going to see. Okay, Aronian starts to fight back here. Well, fight back. As I say, I still prefer white's position, I have to say. Now here's an interesting moment. Rook e1. The reason I like white's position is because if he can get in e4, then we're getting through to black's king. And Kamsky has to play very accurately around here. Otherwise, I think the initiative can really swing over. Rook d8 is a really accurate move here. I know this looks bizarre to protect this d pawn again when the bishop already protects. But the point is this, that white would like to play e4, but now this is prevented because black can exchange here and take on e4, and in this position there's no queen takes d6 because the rook now protects here. So Aronian played rook b1. Okay, could be useful, perhaps coming up here to attack here, maybe swinging over to d3. Queen f7. Okay, again we have to look at e4. Let's see this move. If black would take, then I think white has got what he wants here. I know this bishop is still a strong piece, but you can see that black's king is opening up a bit. The knight might land on d5. Perhaps we have to defend f2 first, and knight d5, or possibly knight d3 to push away the bishop, and then try to come in on the e-file. That's a possibility. I think white has achieved a lot there actually. But after e4, black is still okay if he takes and takes here, and you can see that queen takes f4 is possible. This is very important actually. If black doesn't have this, then I think white's doing all right. And here the point is that if bishop takes bishop, then black actually wins with g3. That's going to be a winning attack. So white would have to defend with queen c2. So black has won a pawn. Actually, this is still playable for white. I think white has reasonable compensation in this position. I think black should also be okay. But yeah, I would say just enough compensation for a pawn, but black is still all right there. So again, e4 has sort of been prevented by black. So Aronian played queen d2. And then queen f6, that's a very interesting move indeed. Threatening bishop c3, of course, so again e4 is prevented. And if rook b3, then black is going to plough on the king side with h4. So Aronian took the pawn on h5. Big decision. But black is fine after this. At first I was expecting queen h8. Attacking the knight, and then the knight has to come back, and then bishop c3, and I thought this is very strange indeed. Black is just winning an exchange. In fact, there's a nice tactic here. After black takes the rook, you don't recapture, but you throw in bishop takes f5. That's very important indeed. And again, we're getting through to the king. Now, with accuracy, black might be okay in this position, but it's very tough. Well, first of all, we'll give that bishop, but you can see that the king lacks pawns. Then we want the cut pawns to be back here, covering the king. So this is my big problem with the Dutch defence, that if things go wrong, and you have to play very accurately indeed, then your king can really suffer. And you can see that white's king, by contrast, is very well protected. But Kamsky did play accurately here. Instead of queen h8, the greedy queen h8, he played queen h6. Good move. The knight has to come back, and now you'll notice the h-file is open, and suddenly this is a very powerful counterattack. But Aronian was very cool here. He just came away with the king, and he can just about get away with this. This looks extremely dangerous, but it seems that black doesn't have quite enough here. There are various ways. For example, bishop takes g3 looks extremely dangerous with the idea rook takes, and now you come in with the rook, and you follow up with g3, and this is winning. But after bishop takes g3, there is a defense. You can actually drive black's queen away, like so, and queen takes, and finally you get to take the bishop, and white well, should have the better chances there. Or there's rook h2, but after this you can actually take the bishop on c6, and well, there's nothing better actually than queen takes c6, and white should survive that position. So back we go. Kamsky played king g7, which to my is very logical, so preventing any nonsense with knight e7, and also preparing for rook number 2 to join the attack. But after queen d1, a very safe move indeed, white is fine because he can force the trade of queens, and that's what happened, and the game suddenly fizzled out into a draw. Opposite colour bishops, and now Aronian took no chances and traded all the rooks off, and they reached a drawn endgame. Let me just take you through to the end of the game. They played a few more moves, but neither side really has any winning chances here at all. So a game that had its moments, was strategically very unbalanced. There were some interesting tries, but ultimately, yeah, came to a draw in the end. But Kamsky did show better form today. So with one round to go, the scores are Magnus Carlsen still in the lead with 3.5, Hikaru Nakamura with 3. Those players drew in round 5, a rather tedious game actually. I don't think Nakamura tried very hard to win. Aronian has 2.5, and Kamsky still at the bottom with 1 point. In the final round, Carlsen will play Aronian with the white pieces, and it's Kamsky with the white pieces against Nakamura. Any of those 3 players can still win the tournament.